I still don't know why I looked at him first. There were maybe 200 people on that pavement that afternoon. Tourists, kids on their father's shoulders, a man selling little plastic flags that spun in the wind. And out of all of it, my eyes went straight to the young guard standing outside the gate, like something told me to remember his face. I'm going to tell you what happened that day, all of it, because for a long time I couldn't. People didn't believe me. They thought I was adding bits, making it bigger than it was, but there were others who saw it too, and one of them was a general, so. Let me start from the beginning. It was late summer, one of those London days where the sky can't decide what it wants to be. Gray in the morning, then this thin sunlight breaking through by noon, warm on your neck but not warm enough to take your jacket off. I remember the smell of the place. Horses, exhaust from the black cabs, and somebody's coffee going cold on the railing. I'd come down to London for 2 days. My daughter had begged me for months. She was 9. She wanted to see the guards, the proper ones with the tall black hats, the red coats. She'd seen them in a picture book and decided they were the most important men in England. "Do they ever move, Dad?" she asked me on the train. "No," I said. "That's the whole point, they stand still." "For how long?" "Hours." She thought about that for a while, looking out the window. "That's the bravest thing I ever heard," she said. I laughed at the time. Kids say things like that. But later that day I stopped laughing about it. Because she was right, and I hadn't understood how right until I watched a boy, because he was barely more than a boy, stand still while the world came apart around him. Anyway, we got to the palace around midday. It was packed. School holidays, so there were families everywhere, prams, ice cream, that whole crowd hum. My daughter, her name is Ellie. She pushed straight to the front like a little arrow, and I lost her for a second and my heart did that thing it does. Then I saw her small hand gripping the railing and I breathed again. And there he was. The young guard. He couldn't have been much past 20. You could tell even under the hat. Something in the face still soft, not fully finished if that makes sense. But he stood like he'd been carved. Rifle at his side, chin level, eyes fixed on some point across the road that only he could see. He didn't blink much. Or maybe he did and I just couldn't catch it. Ellie stared up at him like he was made of gold. "Is he real?" she whispered to me. "Course he's real. He looks like a toy soldier." She meant it as the highest praise. In her book that was a compliment, but you know how words are. Sometimes a nice word turns nasty in another mouth, and that's exactly what happened. Because standing not far from us was a group of men, 4 of them I'd say, loud, the kind of loud that fills up a whole space and makes strangers glance at each other. They'd been drinking, I think, or at least a couple of them had. Middle of the day and already too loud. There's a certain type. You've met them. Everywhere they go, they need to be the biggest thing in the room. Even outdoors, even here, they needed the crowd to be about them. One of them, big fella, sunglasses shoved up on his head, phone already out, heard Ellie say it. "Toy soldier," he repeated, loud, grinning at his mates. "That's exactly what he is, a little toy soldier." His friends laughed. And then it started. I want to be careful here because I've told this part before and people have got the wrong idea. They think it was some huge scene straight away. It wasn't. At first it was just needling, small stuff. The big man walked right up to the line, closer than you're supposed to, and started waving his hand in front of the guard's face. "Hello, anyone home?" Nothing, the guard didn't move. "Mate, I'm talking to you." He clicked his fingers. "Wakey, wakey." Nothing. The friends found this hilarious. One of them started filming, holding his phone sideways, narrating like he was some kind of presenter. Look at this, he's not even a real person, he's a statue, he's a mannequin they put out for the tourists." And the young guard just stood there, eyes forward, breathing slow. I could see his chest moving just a little. That was the only sign he was flesh and not stone. Now here's a thing you learn when you've lived a while. There's a difference between not reacting and not feeling. People confuse them all the time. They saw a still face and thought there was nobody behind it, but I was close, closer than them, and I could see it in the small things, the tiny tightening at the corner of his jaw, the way his knuckles were just a fraction wider on the rifle. He was feeling every single word. He was just choosing not to let it out. That, to me, is a harder thing than shouting back. Any fool can shout back. The big man got bolder. That's how it goes with people like that. When they don't get a rise, they push harder because in their heads the silence is a challenge. He leaned in close, so close I could smell the beer off him from where I stood, and he said something low, right into the guard's ear. I didn't hear all of it. I heard the end. Probably couldn't even lift that gun if it was real. And I watched this young lad, this toy soldier, not flinch. My hands were shaking and I wasn't even the one being spoken to. I wanted to say something. I'm ashamed to tell you I didn't, not then. I had Ellie's hand in mine and a coward's voice in my head telling me not to make it worse, not in front of her, not with men like that. So I stood there like everyone else, watching, doing nothing. There's a woman I'll always remember from that afternoon. Older lady, headscarf, standing a bit behind me. She kept muttering, "Leave the boy alone, leave him be." But quiet, to herself. The way you complain when you're too frightened to complain properly. I think half the crowd was doing that. All of us muttering, none of us moving. The men kept it up for a good 10 minutes. It felt longer. One of them did a stupid little march up and down, knees high, saluting like an idiot, and the tourists laughed because they didn't know what else to do, and the laughter fed the men, and it got worse. The big one started with the phone again, right up in the guard's face now. "Say something, come on, one word. I'll give you a $5 if you say one word." Silence. 2 words, anything. Silence. See, he turned to the crowd, arms wide, playing the showman. Nothing up there, nothing, toy soldier. And a few people laughed. God forgive them, a few people laughed. I looked at Ellie. She wasn't laughing. Her little face had gone all serious and pinched, the way kids look when they can feel something's wrong but they can't put a name to it. She tugged my sleeve. "Dad, why are they being mean to him?" I didn't have an answer. What do you say? Because some grown men never grew up. Because cruelty's an easy game when you know the other person can't hit back. I just squeezed her hand. "He's all right, love," I said. "He's strong, see how still he is. That's him being strong." She nodded, but she wasn't convinced. Neither was I. Now here's the part where things turned. There was a moment, and everyone who was there remembers this moment. I've since spoken to a couple of them, where the young guard's discipline had a job to do. A real job, not just enduring insults. Because at some point, one of the men decided the joke wasn't enough anymore. He wanted to touch him. He reached out to knock the guard's hat. I saw it coming half a second before it happened, the hand going up, that drunk grin. And in that half second, everything changed because the young guard moved. Not much, but God, it was something to see. There's a rule, you see, though I didn't fully understand it at the time. When a guard is interfered with, when someone crosses that line, he's allowed to act. He doesn't just stand there and take being touched. And so in one movement, one clean, snapping, practiced movement, the guard brought his rifle across, stamped his boot down hard on the stone so the crack of it went through the whole crowd like a gunshot, and shouted, "Stand back from the Queen's Guard." I've never heard a voice like it. It came out of that soft young face like thunder out of a clear sky. The whole pavement went silent. The big man staggered back, actually staggered like he'd been shoved, though the guard hadn't touched him. His sunglasses fell off his head and clattered on the ground, and nobody picked them up. For a second, just a second, the young guard's eyes locked onto the big man's, and there was nothing soft in them anymore. There was something that had been trained and sharpened and tested, something old in a young face. Then, as quick as it came, it was gone. He returned to his position. Rifle back at his side, chin level, eyes forward, stone again. Like nothing had happened. The crowd broke into applause, actual applause. It rolled through us in a wave, people clapping, a couple of blokes shouting, "Go on, son." The old lady behind me was clapping so hard her headscarf slipped. Ellie was jumping up and down, absolutely delighted, shouting, "He moved, Dad, he moved." And the big man. He stood there, red in the face, and I thought for one bad second he was going to do something stupid. His mates had gone quiet. The whole crowd had turned. That's the thing about a crowd, it's with you until suddenly it isn't, and then it's the loneliest place in the world. He picked up his sunglasses off the ground, tried to laugh, but it came out wrong, thin, and he muttered whatever and pulled his mates away. I thought that was the end of it. I thought I'd go home and tell this story at dinner, the day the guard put the loudmouth in his place. A good story, a neat one. But it wasn't the end. It was barely the middle, because none of us, not me, not Ellie, not the applauding crowd, had any idea what was about to happen, and none of us knew who that young guard really was. Not yet. The general knew, but he wasn't there yet. Let me tell you about the quiet before. After the men left, the crowd sort of settled. People went back to their photos, their ice creams, that low holiday hum returned. The young guard stood as if nothing had happened, but I couldn't stop watching him now. Something about the whole thing had got its hooks in me. And I noticed things. I noticed that whenever a child came to the railing, his eyes softened, just a flicker. He couldn't move, couldn't speak, but there was a warmth that came off him when the little ones stared up at him with their mouths open. When Ellie waved at him, she couldn't help herself. I swear I saw the corner of his mouth twitch. Not a smile. He'd never break like that, but a wanting to smile, a held-back one. I noticed he stood a fraction differently to the other guard further down, straighter if that's possible, prouder, like the uniform meant more to him than a uniform usually means. Some men wear a job, some men wear a calling. You can tell the difference if you look. And I noticed, this is the strange part, and I only understood it much later, that under the strap of his uniform near the collar there was the edge of something. A bit of dark metal or cloth half tucked away, not part of the standard kit. I'm no expert, but I've seen enough guards on telly to know the uniform's the same on every man. This was something extra, something he was carrying that the others weren't. I thought maybe it was a strap or a fastening. I didn't think much of it. I should have. That little edge of hidden metal was the whole story, but we'll get there. Around 1 o'clock my stomach was rumbling and Ellie was flagging, so I said, "Come on, love, let's find some lunch," and she made me promise we'd come back to see the guard again. I promised. We wandered off toward the park, found a bench, ate some sandwiches that had gone a bit warm in my bag. Ellie talked the whole time. About the guard. About how he shouted. About how the mean man's glasses fell off, which she thought was the funniest thing she'd ever seen. "When I grow up," she announced, mouth full, "I'm going to stand still like that." "Are you now?" "Yep, and if anyone's mean to me, I'm going to go." And she did an impression, stamping her little foot on the grass. "Stand back." I laughed until my eyes watered. God, I needed that laugh, considering what was coming. We were maybe a 15-minute walk from the palace by then. Edge of the park. The afternoon had settled into something golden and slow. I remember thinking, this is a good day. One of the good ones. The kind you file away. That's when it happened. There was a sound. I don't have good words for it, even now, even after all this time. It wasn't like the films. In the films, it's a big clean boom. This wasn't clean. This was a flat, heavy crack, and then a punch of air I felt in my chest before I heard the rest of it, and then a long, low rumble like the ground itself had cleared its throat. Birds went up out of every tree at once, hundreds of them, a black cloud of them. And for a second, a horrible frozen second, nobody moved. The whole park just stood there. Then the screaming started. I grabbed Ellie. I don't even remember deciding to. One moment she was on the bench and the next she was in my arms with my hand pressing her head into my shoulder, and I was running. Everyone was running and nobody knew which way to run because nobody knew where it had come from. Somewhere near the road. Near Hyde Park, they'd say later. A device. Left in a bag. That's all I knew in the moment. That something had gone off and that I had my daughter and that I had to get her away. The panic was the worst part, worse than the bang, because a crowd in panic is its own kind of danger. People fell, people got trampled. I saw a woman go down and two strangers hauled her up by the arms without breaking stride. Prams abandoned. A man shouting a name over and over, one name, Sarah, Sarah, his voice cracking. Sirens starting up in the distance, that rising wail, more and more of them. And somewhere in all that, some part of my brain, the useless part, the part that files things, thought about the young guard. Because his post was near there, not right on it, but near, and he couldn't run. That was the thing that hit me even as I was running myself, clutching my child. He couldn't run. It's his job to stand. Everyone in the world would be running away from that sound, and he'd be one man told to stand still and face it. I didn't go back. I want to be honest with you. I didn't turn around and go back toward the danger like a hero. I got my daughter to safety. I found a side street, then another, got us behind a building, held her while she cried and shook. That was my job that day. That was the only job I had. But other people were there, closer, and they saw what he did. And what he did, what that toy soldier did in the minutes after that bomb went off, is the reason a general came looking for him. It's the reason there's a story to tell at all. It's the reason I'm sitting here telling it to you now, all these years later, with my hands still going a bit when I get to this part. Because while the whole city ran, one young man stood his post, and it turned out that wasn't the bravest thing he'd do that day, not by a long way. I'll tell you the rest, but I need a minute. Give me a minute. I said I needed a minute. I've had it. Let me carry on. Now, I wasn't there for the next part. I want to be straight with you about that because I've heard people tell this story like they saw it all with their own eyes, and half of them weren't within a mile of the place. I got most of what I'm about to tell you from a man called Derek. He was a retired postman, 60-odd, and he'd been standing near the gates when it all went off. He couldn't run. Bad hip. So he did the only thing he could do. He pressed himself against the railings and he watched. And what he watched, he never forgot. He told me the whole thing weeks later in a cafe, and his tea went stone cold in front of him because he couldn't stop talking once he started. So this is Derek's part. I'm just the one passing it along. When the bomb went off, Derek said the first thing that struck him wasn't the noise. It was the guard. Because everybody moved. Everybody. Even the police near the gate flinched and turned and started shouting into their radios and moving toward the sound. That's the human thing to do. Your body decides before your brain does. Something goes bang, you turn, you duck, you run. Nobody chooses it. It just happens. And in the middle of all that movement, all that flinching and turning and running, there was one still point. The young guard. He didn't move. Derek said it was the strangest thing he ever saw in his life. Hundreds of people scattering like a flock of birds, and this one lad standing dead still, rifle at his side, chin level, eyes forward, exactly as he'd been standing all afternoon while drunk men mocked him. The bomb went off maybe 400 yards away, and he stood like the ground under him was the only solid thing left in the world. I thought he was in shock, Derek told me. That's what I thought first. I thought the poor lad's frozen, he can't move, it's fear. But it weren't fear. I've seen fear. Fear looks different. This were something else. This were a decision. Because here's the thing about that post. It's not just standing there for the tourists' photos. Not underneath. Underneath it means I hold this line. Whatever comes, I hold it. And most days nothing comes and it just looks like a lad in a funny hat standing about. But that day something came, and the meaning of the whole thing showed itself. This was what all the stillness had been for, all the hours, all the enduring, all the not flinching while idiots clicked their fingers in his face. It had all been training for the one moment when the ground shook and everyone ran and one man had to stay. He stayed. Derek said there was a woman near him, young mum, and she got separated from her little boy in the panic, 4 or 5 years old. The boy was standing in the open, screaming, rooted to the spot the way tiny children do when they're too frightened to move, and the crowd was surging past him, and any second he was going to go under, get knocked down, trampled. and the mother couldn't get to him. She was being carried the wrong way by the crush, screaming his name. You know the sound. The worst sound there is. And the guard broke his post. Now you have to understand what that means. To a man like him, breaking post is not a small thing. It's the last thing. You do not leave your position. It's drilled into you until it's in your bones. But he took one look at that child in the path of the crowd, and he made a choice that no drill could make for him. He moved. Derek said he'd never seen a big man move so fast. One second he was a statue, and the next he'd covered the ground between them, and he had that little boy scooped up in one arm, rifle in the other, and he'd turned his own body into a wall between the child and the crush. People slammed into his back and he didn't budge. Just stood there, this young lad, holding a stranger's child, taking the weight of a panicking crowd on his shoulders so a 4-year-old wouldn't go under. And then over all the noise he shouted, not the parade ground shout from earlier, a different one. Derek said it cut right through everything. This way, calm, follow me, this way. And people did. That's the thing about a crowd in panic. It's looking for something to follow, anything. A crowd in panic is 100 frightened people all silently begging for one person to know what to do. And here was one person who looked like he knew what to do. Red coat, tall hat, that voice. He started moving them, herding them, one arm still cradling that child, toward the open ground away from the gate, away from wherever the next danger might be, steering the whole terrified mess of them like a sheepdog. Get away from the buildings, get to open space, move but don't crush, this way, this way. The mother reached him. Derek said she was half mad with it, grabbing at her son, and the guard passed the boy into her arms as gentle as you like, this great trained soldier handing over a child like the child was made of glass, and then he turned straight back into it, back toward the danger, because there were more people. There were always more people, an old man down on the ground, a group of tourists frozen and lost, and he went to each of them. Derek said he lost count of how many the lad pulled clear. 6, 7 more, I don't know, he just kept going back. Everyone else were going one way away, and he kept going the other way into it, every time. And this is a boy that 2 hours before, grown men had called a toy. The sirens were properly on top of things by now, police pouring in, ambulances, that whole machine that spins up when the worst happens. And here's a detail I want you to hold on to because it matters for what comes next. When the police reached the gate, armed police, serious men, the ones who come running toward the sound of a bomb, one of them shouted at the guard to fall back. Get to cover, clear the area, standard, sensible. Any normal person would have gone. The guard didn't go. He looked at the armed officer, and Derek said, Derek swore to me. The guard just gave a small shake of the head and said something back. Derek was too far to hear it. But the officer, this hardened firearms officer, he stopped. He looked at the young guard for a second, and then he nodded, and he let him stay. Now you don't do that. You don't let a lad in a ceremonial uniform stay in a live scene. Unless there's something about him you've just recognized. Unless in that one exchanged sentence, he told you something that changed how you saw him entirely. Derek didn't understand it at the time. Neither did I when he told me. We put it down to bravery and left it there. We were wrong. It wasn't just bravery. It was something the young guard knew about himself that nobody else on that pavement knew. And it was hidden, literally hidden, under the collar of his uniform. That little edge of dark metal I'd noticed that morning and thought nothing of. The general was the one who uncovered it, and the general arrived about 20 minutes later. Let me tell you about the general. I met him actually, much later, once, and I'll tell you he wasn't what I expected. In my head, a general is a big loud slab of a man with a chest full of medals and a voice that rattles windows. This man was small, wiry, quiet. He had these pale gray eyes that seemed to look at everything and give nothing back. The kind of man who's seen so much he's gone quiet about all of it. When he spoke, you leaned in because he never wasted a word and you didn't want to miss one. He'd been nearby when the bomb went off. Not on duty. off duty in a car, being driven somewhere, and when it went off he'd done what men like him do, he'd got out and gone toward it. Because that's 40 years of habit and it doesn't switch off just because you're retired. Old soldiers run toward the bang. It's the young ones who have learned sense who run away. So the general arrived in the middle of it, and by the time he got there the immediate panic had broken. The crowd had thinned. The wounded were being seen to, and the general, walking through it all with those pale eyes taking everything in, saw the young guard. The guard had gone back to his post. That's what stopped the general dead. Not the damage, not the sirens, him. This young lad standing at his position by the gate as though the whole world hadn't just come apart, chin level, eyes forward. His red coat was torn at the shoulder. There was dust and grime all down one side of him. There was, and the general noticed this straight away because a soldier's eye goes to it, blood on his sleeve that wasn't his own. And he was standing his post, perfectly, as if it were an ordinary Tuesday. The general told me he'd seen a great many things in his life. Brave things, terrible things. But he said the sight of that young man, filthy and torn and back at his position after what he'd just done, holding the line when there was barely a line left to hold, he said it did something to him he couldn't explain. A man of his years and his rank, and he had to stop and steady himself against the railing. He walked over to the guard, slowly. Now the guard didn't move, of course. Couldn't. On post, you don't acknowledge anyone. The general knew that better than anyone alive, so he didn't expect a reaction. He just stood in front of him close and looked at the young man's face. And he saw what I'd seen that morning, but he understood it, which I hadn't. He saw the softness that hadn't fully hardened. He saw the discipline holding a great weight of feeling down under the surface. He saw a young man who had just done extraordinary things and was now standing there refusing to let any of it show, because his job was to stand, and so he stood. And then the general saw the edge of it. The thing under the collar. Where the coat was torn at the shoulder, where the strap had been pulled loose in all the chaos, something had shifted. Something that was normally tucked away, hidden, invisible, had worked its way half into the light. A small edge of dark metal. An emblem, not standard issue, not part of any ceremonial kit. Something a man carries close to him, hidden because it means more than a decoration means, because it's not for showing. The general's breath caught. He knew that emblem. I'm not going to tell you yet what it was. I know, but hear me out. Because the way I found out, the way the whole crowd found out, is the whole of the ending, and I'd be cheating you to rush it. What I'll tell you now is just this. The general looked at that half-hidden edge of metal at the young guard's collar, and his whole face changed. Derek was watching by then. He'd hobbled closer, and Derek said the general went white. Not frightened white. Something else. Something like, when you see a thing you never thought you'd see again in your life. And the general did something nobody expected. This small, quiet, senior man in front of a thinning crowd in a scene full of police and paramedics stood to attention in front of a 20-year-old guard, straightened his back, squared himself, and he raised his hand, slow and deliberate, and he saluted him. A general, saluting a private soldier at his post. It doesn't happen, it's not how it works. Rank goes the other way. The whole idea of it is backwards. And every soldier who saw it, and there were a few by now, police, a couple of off-duty servicemen who'd stopped to help, every one of them went still, because they knew they were seeing something that shouldn't happen, which meant they were seeing something that mattered more than the rules. The young guard's composure broke. Just for a second, Derek saw it. His eyes came off that fixed point across the road, just for a heartbeat, and they went to the general's face, and something moved across the young man's own face that Derek couldn't put a name to. Recognition, and grief, and something like relief, as if he'd been carrying something alone for a very long time, and here at last was one other person in the world who knew what it was. Then he fixed his eyes forward again, back to stone, but there was a wet shine to them now that hadn't been there before. The general lowered his salute, and he leaned in close to the young guard's ear, the same spot where, hours earlier, A drunk man had leaned in to sneer at him, and the general said something. Quiet, just for him. Derek couldn't hear it. Nobody could. But he saw the young guard's jaw tighten, saw him swallow hard, saw the effort it took him to hold his position and not come apart entirely. And then the general stepped back and he turned to the police and he said something to them, and whatever he said, they moved. Fast. Because a moment later there were officers clearing a space around the young guard, and the general was making a phone call, and word was going up some chain of command that none of us could see. Something had been set in motion. Something big. The men from earlier, the loudmouths, the ones who'd called him a toy, they weren't there anymore. They'd run with everyone else when the bomb went off. And I've always thought that was a kind of justice in its way. That they missed it. That they never got to see who they'd been mocking. That they went home and told their mates about the day they wound up a guard, and never knew that the toy soldier they'd been laughing at was about to have a general salute him in the street. Because that emblem meant something. That hidden edge of dark metal at his collar. It told the whole story of who this young man really was, and why a man who never flinched had chosen a job where all he had to do was stand still, and why he'd run back into a bombing again and again without a second's hesitation, and why an old general went white and forgot his own rank at the sight of him. I found out what it was that same evening. I was still in London, still shaking, still holding Ellie a little too tight, and it came on the news. And when I understood, when the whole country understood, what that young guard had been carrying hidden under his collar all along, and what he'd done before he ever put on that red coat. I had to sit down. I put my head in my hands and I sat down on the curb and I couldn't speak for a while. Ellie patted my back. "Don't cry, Dad," she said. "The toy soldier's okay." "He's not a toy soldier, love," I managed to say. "He never was." "I'll tell you the rest in a minute. The emblem, what it meant, what the general said in his ear, and what happened to that young man after, because it's not what you'd think, and it's the part that stays with me most of all. But first, let me tell you about the silence that fell over that whole ruined pavement after the general's salute. Because in the middle of all that wreckage and all those sirens, a hush went through the crowd. People didn't know what they'd seen, but they knew it was holy somehow. They knew they'd been let in on something. And every single one of them took their phones out, not to mock him this time. To honor him. That's where I'll stop, just for now, so here's the rest of it. The part I've told the fewest people, because it's the part that means the most, and you don't hand a thing like that around lightly. It came on the news that same night. I was in a little hotel off a side street, the telly on low so as not to wake Ellie, who'd finally gone under after the day we'd had. And there it was, grainy phone footage, a general in the street, a salute going the wrong way up the ranks, and a name. They didn't have his full name at first. They called him the guard who held his post. But over the next day or two the story filled itself in, the way stories do, and I learned who he was. And when I did, I understood everything I'd seen that morning and hadn't been able to read. His name was Thomas. Tom. I won't give the surname, the family asked later that it be kept quiet, and I'll honor that. But Tom. A perfectly ordinary name for a young man who turned out to be anything but ordinary. Before the red coat, before the tall hat, before he ever stood outside those gates and let drunk men click their fingers in his face, Tom had been somewhere else. Somewhere hot and far away. He'd served. And in a place with a name most people in that crowd couldn't have found on a map, something had happened. A patrol. An ambush. It went wrong the way these things go wrong, fast and loud and with no warning. And in the middle of it, a young Tom, 19 at the time, barely more than a schoolboy, had done a thing. I'll tell you the plain version, because the plain version is the only version that doesn't cheapen it. His unit was pinned, men wounded, out in the open, no cover, and the thing that would have saved them all was gone, disabled, out of reach. I won't pretend to know the military detail because I don't, and Derek didn't either, and even the general only gave me the shape of it. But the shape was this. Somebody had to cross open ground. Somebody had to go out into the fire alone on foot to reach the wounded and hold a position that could not be held so that the others could get clear. It was, by every reckoning, a thing you don't come back from. Everybody knew it. Tom knew it. Tom went, and he held it. He held that impossible position alone, wounded himself for long enough. Long enough that the men behind him lived. Every one of them lived. Because a 19-year-old stood where no one should have been able to stand and refused to fall back and held. That was the emblem. The dark edge of metal I'd noticed under his collar that morning and thought was a strap. What the wind and the chaos had worked half into the light for the general to see. It was the highest thing this country can give a soldier. The very highest. The one they don't give to many and mostly give to the dead. Tom was one of the living few, and he wore it hidden, under his collar, against his skin. Not on his chest where the world could see, where it would have earned him 100 free pints and a lifetime of being pointed at. Hidden. That's the part that broke me when I understood it. This young man had done the bravest thing a person can do. He'd been given the highest honor there is. And what did he do with it? He took the quietest posting he could find. A posting where the whole job is to stand still and say nothing and let strangers laugh at you. He went and stood at a gate and let men call him a toy. Because, and this is what the general understood the instant he saw that emblem, and what took me a good while longer, a man like that isn't done serving just because the war let him go. He needed a post. He needed a line to hold. And having held the worst line there is, he chose the quietest one he could find and he held it the same way, total, silent, complete. Whether the thing coming at him was gunfire or a drunk man's finger or a bomb 400 yards away, the answer was the same. Hold the line, don't flinch, stay. That's why he didn't move when the men mocked him. It wasn't that he couldn't. Good God, he could have flattened all 4 of them without breaking a sweat, and everyone who knew the truth understood that afterward, which is its own kind of terrible and funny. He didn't move because moving wasn't the job. The job was to stand. And a man who'd stood through what he'd stood through wasn't going to be shifted by a fool with a phone. And that's why, when the bomb went off and the world ran, he stayed. And then when a child was going under, he broke post, the one thing you never break because he'd learned, out there in that hot far place, the difference between the rule and the reason behind the rule. The rule is stand your post. The reason is protect people. And when the two came apart, when standing still would have let a 4-year-old die, he knew which one was really the order. He'd known it at 19 with the wounded in the open. He knew it again at the gate. He went. Now, what the general said in his ear. I asked him that one time I met him. I didn't think he'd tell me. It felt like a private thing, and the general was not a man who gave things away. But he looked at me with those pale gray eyes for a long moment, deciding, and then he told me. And I've kept it close ever since, and I'll give it to you now, and then I'll be done. When the general leaned into that young guard's ear, the same ear a drunk had sneered into hours before, he said this. I know what you did. I know what that is at your collar, and I know why you're standing here where no one can see it. You don't have to prove anything to anyone ever again, son. But I'm glad it's you standing at this gate. England's in good hands. Now hold your post, soldier. I've got the rest. And then he'd stepped back and made his calls and set the machine in motion, because that's what he could do for the lad, take the weight off him. Handle the aftermath. Let Tom go on standing at his gate as long as he could, before the story got out and everything changed. Because everything did change, of course. You can't put footage like that on the news and expect a young man's quiet life to stay quiet. Within a week the whole country knew. The papers had the story. The gate was mobbed, but not by mockers this time. People came to stand and watch him with tears in their eyes. People left flowers at the railing. Children, and this is the one that gets me, children brought their little toy soldiers and lined them up along the base of the railing, dozens of them, red-coated plastic figures standing to attention, because the word had spread even among the little ones. That the toy soldier was real. That the toy soldier had been the bravest of all of them the whole time, and nobody had known. Tom stood through all of it, chin level, eyes forward, same as ever. But those who were close said that now, when a child laid a toy soldier at the railing and looked up at him, that held-back smile of his got harder and harder to hold back. They gave him a medal for the bombing, too, in the end, for the child and the crowd and going back in again and again. He accepted it quietly, the way he did everything. And then, and I love this, I absolutely love this, he asked to go back to his post. He didn't want the desk job they offered or the speaking tour or any of it. He wanted his gate. He wanted to stand. I don't know where Tom is now. Life moves people on. But I like to think he's somewhere still, standing a line of some kind, holding it total and silent and complete, the way he's held every line he's ever been given. I went back to that gate once a few years after, on my own. Ellie was older by then, off doing teenager things, no time for guards and toy soldiers anymore. I stood at the railing where she'd once gripped it with her small hand. There was a different young guard on post that day. Not Tom. Just some other lad standing still, chin level, eyes forward, letting the tourists photograph him and the odd idiot try to make him laugh. And I found myself looking at him completely differently than I would have before. Because here's the thing I carry out of that whole day, and it's the thing I most want to leave you with. I'll never know, I'll never know what any of them are carrying. That young lad at the gate, the one I didn't recognize, standing there so still and so silent that half the crowd thought there was nobody home. For all I know, he'd done something extraordinary too. For all I know, he had his own dark edge of metal tucked under his own collar, his own held line somewhere hot and far away, his own reasons for choosing the quietest post he could find. We look at people and we decide we know them. We see a still face and we think there's nothing behind it. We see a young man in a funny hat and we think, toy soldier, and we click our fingers and we laugh. And we have no idea at all, that the quietest man on the pavement might be the one who once walked out alone into fire so that others could live. That stillness isn't emptiness. That the ones who don't need to show you what they are very often the ones who have got the most to show. Ellie said it that morning before any of it happened. She looked up at him, and she said standing still was the bravest thing she'd ever heard of. She was 9. She had no idea how right she was. I think about that a lot, how a child looked at that young man and saw straight through to the truth of him when a crowd of grown adults looked and saw a joke. Kids do that. They haven't learned to be clever and cruel yet. They just see. So the next time you're somewhere and there's a person standing quiet at the edge of it, doing their job, saying nothing, taking whatever the day throws at them without a word, before you decide there's nothing there, before you decide you know what they are, I want you to remember Tom. Remember the toy soldier who was no toy. Remember the emblem under the collar that nobody could see. Remember the general who forgot his own rank in the street. And remember that everyone you'll ever meet is holding a line you can't see. Stand back from them a moment. Give them the respect you'd want. You never know who's a hero in a coat.